Well, welcome back again if you're coming back, or welcome if you're just starting. But our session this time, our module on Fire Up Your Teaching, is on types of engagement. And I'm Linnea Lyding.
And I'm Gary Damore. And we've been talking about this thread of engagement running through everything. So now we're going to give you this, think of a toolbox with just loaded with all kinds of cool tools. That's what we're going to do, is provide you with a lot of tools for how you can engage your students throughout all the essential elements of a lesson.
Mm-hmm. But we're going to start, like we said before, you have to give information sometimes, like when we talked about why do you write an objective, and then we said how do you do it. So we're going to start with what kinds of engagement there are. So we're just looking mainly right now at direct instruction and checking for understanding, and we're going to kind of go through, we're going to show you actually some research that there is on types of engagement.
So as we've encouraged you to develop an objective for every lesson you teach, and one or more objectives. We've been putting an objective at the front end of every one of our modules, and so staying true to that, our objective for this particular module is that given classroom scenarios, you, the learner, will evaluate the types and effectiveness of student engagement.
All right, so
that's where we're headed.
We're going to give them some classroom scenarios to kind of get them going. So we're going to start off, and because we know that some people are more auditory and some people are more visual, we're going to read these to you, not because we don't think you can read, but I'm not all about reading PowerPoints, but we're going to read these. Do you want to read first?
Sure, I'll do the first one. Dr. Johnson is a history professor. Students love his class because they have so much fun. He works very hard to make the information fun to learn. He does this by showing documentaries, movies, and playing games. For example, on September 11, he shows videos of the collapse of the World Trade Center. In addition to the movies and documentaries, Dr. Johnson creates games where students need to recall historical facts and dates. Every time the dean walks by, he is impressed by how much fun the students seem to be having.
So we changed this up a little because you're probably sitting at your computer. So we want you to vote with your finger from 1 to 10 on how engaged you think the students are in this class. So just vote with your finger. Now, if we were doing this in class, we would actually, and I've done this in class, we voted with our feet. So I would have students walk from one end of the room to the other, and just choose, from 1 to 10, how engaged are the students, or whatever it is that I'm covering that time.
And you're going to make sure your students know that 1 is not very engaged at all and 10 is highly engaged. And so make sure you explain the values of what your 1 to 10 is.
Yeah, and one more, we could use it even if you are teaching something and you want to know how much do you know about this already? And we can have them, I've had that, where students, I have them line up from one end to the other. I don't know very much, I know a lot. And then sometimes I fold that line so the people who know a lot can be working together with the people who don't know as much. So
another way to do it is to have students hold up a number 1 to 10, and so that way you, as the instructor, get immediate feedback. You can look across your entire classroom. And you can say most people are feeling that it's whatever the question that you're trying to get answered is highly. It's at the 10. It's in that 10 range, or maybe it's at the 1, and so it gives you a sense of where your learners are coming from. So it's a great strategy.
Especially if you have a class of 60 students or 100 students, just have them hold it up like that, and it works really well. Okay, so we're not going to talk anymore about that. We just had you guys vote, but we're going to look at the next one, and we're going to go back and revisit all of these again. But this is about Dr. Hernandez. He's a calculus, or she's a calculus professor. When the students walk into the room, they immediately know what to do. They sit down and they start working on the assignment that's written on the board while Dr. Hernandez takes attendance. At exactly 7 minutes after the start of class, Dr. Hernandez has the students pass in their bell work, or that material that was written on the board. That's another term that sometimes is used for when people put work on the boards when they come in at the bell to write. Anyway, so she begins working through the problems at that time. All of the students are engaged. They're writing down the information, all the information's on the board. They're careful to write down every step of the equations. At the end of class, Dr. Hernandez explains the homework and the students leave. Whenever the dean walks by, he's impressed that every student is taking notes. Vote with your finger. From 1 to 10, how engaged are the students? Next one.
Okay, I'll read the next one. In Dr. Campbell's chemistry class, the students are presented with new material from the moment they walk in the door until the moment they leave. She knows that there is a great deal of material to cover, so she does not want to waste any time. She has to get these biology majors into medical school. As soon as she has finished presenting the information on one concept, she moves on to the next. She's very knowledgeable in chemistry, and she wants to make sure that her students leave with as much information as possible. Every time the dean walks by, he is impressed by the amount of content that is being presented. Once again, vote with your fingers using that same scale, with 1 being not so engaged to 10 being highly engaged.
So let's think about all of those for a second. Are the students in these scenarios engaged? What do you think, Gary?
I think they are. Yeah.
They're doing something.
Yeah,
right?
they're doing something.
Yeah.
Some of it you can see, some of it you're not sure whether it's overt or covert, we call that, where they're maybe doing some thinking internally, but we see them writing, so they're engaged in some. They're doing something.
So are these types of engagement effective?
I think that's where we're going to try to take this particular module to, seeing that they're okay, but they could be so much better.
Yeah.
So
why or why not? Well, we're gonna look at that. But first of all, I just want you to check out this comic from Gary Larson on the far side, where the student asks, "Can I be excused? My brain is full." I think that's how the students in the chemistry class might have felt. Okay, so in a book called Engaged Instruction, John Almarode states that engagement is multidimensional. So it's emotional, behavioral, and cognitive, with each dimension playing an important part in maintaining overall student engagement in classrooms. So if we think about those 3 kinds, let's talk about them. The first one?
Behavioral engagement?
Yeah. So what is that?
Well, I think, again, looking at what we talk overt and covert behaviors, those are overt things that you can see. You can actually see that students are doing something. Sometimes it is a physical activity they have them doing. Writing is a good example. You have to be careful that you know what they're writing, but they're engaged by writing something. You might have them working in groups, moving around, so behaviorally you can see them, and talking is a behavioral activity. And asking students to engage in conversations with you and with each other is a behavioral engagement.
Yeah, and I would even say that we need to think about how many students are engaged. When you go into classrooms and you look and you see if they're engaged and they're raising their hand, is it just a few? There's research, that says that the same 5 students answer 95% of the questions. Right. So we need to think about how many students are engaged. But yes, behaviorally good. Second one is emotional engagement. And on this one, we're going to have that question again. Our true false. One of our true false comes up. Events, facts, information, etc. with strong emotional aspect create stronger memories. Do you think that is true, or do you think that is false? We'll get to that in a minute. But emotional engagement, getting students excited about what they're learning about. Right. Are you excited when you teach?
Absolutely.
Me too. I love it. And this one especially, because I love engagement, strategies. But I think and I'm sure that you have a passion for your subject matter as well, and you get excited about it. We want to get the students the same way. Right. And the third one is cognitive engagement. So, and that one also has a question: if you learn something deeply, the synaptic activity will create lasting connections. True or false? Cognitive is when we talk about the Bloom's, the depth of knowledge chart, thinking about those, how deeply are they learning? Are we just asking them to memorize something? Or are we asking them to apply it?
Retention is a really critical conversation that we need to have with you along the way here, because we don't want to develop learners who can just regurgitate facts and information. Right. And so we want students who retain the things that they're learning so that they can apply them in new ways. And that's where this cognitive engagement is so critical, because as we take them to deeper levels of understanding, they can then refashion them and think and use them in a new setting. Yeah. And that's what real deep learning is all about.
So if we go back to question number 4 about the emotional, do you think that's true or false? What do you think?
I think
You
it's
know.
true. I know it's true.
So think about your strongest memories. Do you remember like where you were on September 11th? I remember where I was when the World Trade Center fell. People used to say, do you remember where you were when John F. K was shot? I was young. I don't remember that. But some people and some people don't remember that.
I do.
But people remember the Boston Marathon. You know, I mean, there are things that we remember. I mean, those strong emotional, and those are all pretty tragic things. But anything, I mean, you remember good things the same way.
Sure.
So creating those emotional connections will help that with that retention. And then when you learn something deeply, that's where you were just talking about. So we talk about reflection, elaboration, comparison, retrieval, movement, which we're going to talk about, and struggle are all things that help people remember things and retain that information and go deeper with what they're thinking about. Okay, so what type of engagement did you see in Dr. Campbell's class, the chemistry class? What do you think it was? Clearly, it's cognitive engagement. She was trying to get as much content there as she could and just really push as many things as she could across during that time.
As much information as possible. What about Dr. Johnson's class?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So you can see that's the emotional connection and emotional attachment. And it might be in a case where things are off balance here, where it's so much emotional engagement that something gets sacrificed. In this case, it might be some of the cognitive information and engagement. It could also be behavioral opportunities are missed because it's just a lot of more entertainment rather than educational. Right.
I actually saw somebody out here going 2 on that one. That happens to teach history. I think because we did the basic level of facts and knew that more had to be done. In Dr. Hernandez's class, the students were all taking notes. So that's an example of behaviorally they were engaged. They were focused and behaviorally engaged in taking notes. But we don't know if they're really thinking about those notes or if they're just working really hard to copy them down.
And the other thing that's often happens in that environment too is students look like they're taking notes, but you don't know what the content of those notes are either. And so that's something that you can pick up if you're really more fully engaging all of your learners and you're aware of what they're doing. You can be sure that it's not just overt behavior, but overt behavior that's focused on what you're teaching. Okay, so we know that we want our students to be engaged, and we know there's different ways that we can engage them. How can one of our learners here evaluate their lessons for engagement?
So I came up with something that I use since I'm in education, teach education. I teach students how to write lessons all the time, called the secret sauce. So we're going to tell you about the secret sauce of engagement. And when you look at your lessons, I want you to think, remember we talked about there's 3 kinds. There's emotional engagement, behavioral engagement, and cognitive engagement. So look at your lesson after it's written and think about these. 1, is it fun? Are students going to enjoy what they're learning? Are they going to have some fun while they're learning it? That's going to measure your emotional engagement. How many students are involved? So that's where you have to be careful about that. You know, answering questions and the same 5 students. Think about ways that you can get them together in groups, like we talked about. Different things that you can do so that every student is involved. And the last question is, what is the level of Bloom's or depth of knowledge? So that's our cognitive engagement, making sure that we give them the information, that they get the basic information they need, but then application of that information. So if you ask those 3 questions about your lesson, step back, look at your lesson, and ask those 3 questions.
And right now you might be saying to yourself, well, gosh, I don't know. I don't have the tools to fill in those blanks. But that's what the next module is going to be all about. We're going to give you we've given you a lot of background here, but we'll give you some real practical tips and tools to be able to answer these questions and fill in the blanks for those. And to really, again, it's not a matter of just taking a lesson and saying it's good enough, but really we want you to take it and make it great. So you're going to take a good lesson and make it better by having some more tools to be able to do that.
Right. So our closure on this time is to try the secret sauce as you plan your next lesson. So step back and think about, ask those 3 questions. What are the questions?
Questions are, is it fun?
Yeah, which is what kind of engagement?
It's emotional engagement. Good.
I'm putting them on the spot here.
Yeah, no, that's good.
What's the second question?
How many students are participating?
Yeah, so in
That's behavioral.
Yeah, and I even talked about here, like talking and creating, doing things, like not just taking notes. And the last one?
And then what is the level of thinking? It's a cognitive engagement. Let's see how deep or how superficial maybe the lesson task is.